Well, I told you we were going to head to the Hill. Now, when I said the Hill, I'm talking about the publication. Caroline Vakil is with us. She is a breaking news reporter with the Hill. If you haven't seen some of her work, please go do. Please do that. And the Hill is a great place to go for information. It's in my line of work, whether it be through my radio show or my TV show. It's one of those check it out in the morning, type publications. But Carolyn, good to have you coming down the road with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to talk about your piece on Russian sanctions, Russia's latest round of sanctions and the targets that come with it. Speak to people about the piece that you wrote.
Sure. So Russia's foreign ministry basically announced that it was going to be imposing personal sanctions on a number of people, those including Vice President Kamala Harris, White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, Ned Price, the State Department spokesperson, and then also sort of top officials at social media platforms and other companies like Mark Zuckerberg. And so, sort of over the course of the last couple of weeks, they have been Russia has been, publishing more individuals that they have sanctioned, in addition to diplomats that they have sanctioned in both the U.S. and abroad.
So, what does that mean? If Russia sanctions you, other than a badge of honor for many of the people that you just mentioned, what does it mean? How does that affect you as an individual?
So in this specific instance, this is related to them being barred from entering Russia. But, there are other, sanctions can have other sort of impacts. For example, in the U.S., we have sanctioned Russian imports of energy, specifically, coal, natural gas, oil. So, that kind of affects sort of the economy, for example, in Russia, because now we are not taking in those sort of imports. And so that kind of has a number of other consequences. But in this case, this is sort of related to mostly personal individuals.
Does this go as far as saying, and you're not probably going to be able to answer this, but the type of world that Vladimir Putin is trying to create, if you're on this list, does this also mean that you potentially are on his hit list?
That's not something I would be able to answer.
Well, you knew I was going to ask it. I had to ask it. Want to talk, though, about how you would deal with this, because Kamala Harris is the Vice President of the United States. She's going to be in places representing the United States government where she would have to speak with, if we help broker any type of deal, Russian officials. So with what they've laid out here, would they even go to a meeting with her in it?
I don't know the answer to that either. I will say that it's already a very delicate diplomatic relationship between Russia and the rest of the world. Russia has been sort of engaged in what you might think of as a sort of diplomatic expulsion tit for tat. Over the past couple of weeks, Russia and a number of European countries have sort of been trading expulsions of different diplomats from their countries. Russia has said in their announcements through their foreign ministry that in some ways they are sort of mirroring steps that the other side, for example, U.S. or another country, for example, in Europe has already taken. And so that's already a very fragile diplomatic state of affairs, and kind of sort of indicates that the line of communication seems to be a bit more fragmented. But I don't know what that would mean personally for her as someone who might want to be having communications with Russia, for example.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, if I were her, it'd be a badge of honor to me. But that's a political commentary. You're a get the facts right reporter. I appreciate and respect that. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that U.S. is playing a role, and Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States, has admitted that U.S. is working with Ukraine on collecting the evidence over possible war crimes. Can you speak to that, if you would?
Sure. So he made that announcement, as you mentioned, during a press briefing yesterday, speaking to a reporter who asked a question about that. And so he did confirm that the U.S. was involved in helping Ukraine, collecting possible evidence of possible war crimes, I should say, allegedly committed by Russia in Ukraine. The prosecutor general in Ukraine told CNN in an interview earlier this month that at the time they were investigating close to 6,000 cases of war crimes and crimes against humanity. And a prosecutor from the International, Criminal Court has said in, I believe, February that they were already launching an investigation about possible war crimes. But these war crime investigations often take years, and sometimes they can happen after the conflict has ended. So the timeline of this is not quite clear.
Has Vladimir Putin or the Russian government, because they're sending a signal here about who is put under sanction and who can't come into their country, have they sent any signal in relation to, the acknowledgement of U.S.'s involvement in war crimes?
That I don't know. I mean, Merrick Garland's confirmation of this was a little bit recent, so I'm not quite sure if Russia has already commented on that.
Okay, I understand. When you look at where things sit right now with Russia, when you look at the sanctions, you look at the relationships, you look at all of this, and then word coming out from the Biden administration that more money, more arms, all of that is going Ukraine's way. Can we expect more of this, do you feel? Or can we, are we just going to see Russia focus on Ukraine and knowing that the U.S.'s involvement over here is going to continue?
The length of this conflict isn't really quite clear. I mean, it is, Russia is launching a renewed offensive in eastern Ukraine in the Donbas region, after trying to and not being successful in capturing their capital. There are officials who, there was at least one European official earlier this week that, said that they were concerned that and had predicted that Mariupol, which is, one of the sort of worstly devastated areas that, has been documented through news coverage, that it could fall within a number of days. And so it's not clear exactly, the timeline of how these events will play out. I suspect that the U.S., though, will remain engaged. I'm not sure what that will mean, though, in the future in terms of, what other packages they will announce. I know the Treasury Department announced separately yesterday that they were going to be providing $500 million in support for, helping keep Ukrainian government operations afloat. So, things like paying for their pensions, their salaries, that kind of thing. And that's in addition to the $800 million that Biden said will be going towards military aid.
The fact that aid can get there, the fact that we're able to speak to reporters like you that can get the information and see it, much of what you're describing by video. And it's just amazing to me in this modern world, modern communications. I get it. I mean, you and I are talking right here face to face, but, we're not in a war zone. We're not sitting there with word getting out right now about what Russia's doing. And if they don't want it to get out, you would think they'd be able to stop it or would have focused on stopping it. But Carolyn, they haven't done that at all, or at least they haven't been able to.
I think it's also interesting, you're sort of on the backdrop in terms of communications and understanding what's going on in Russia. You're also seeing a crackdown within the country in terms of independent news outlets, not just Russian news outlets, but also international news outlets that were, operating in Russia and have either had to halt operations or have, in the case of like the Washington Post, for example, they have removed bylines and datelines in some situations to protect their reporters. And so I think that it just, we are also becoming in some ways increasingly reliant on Russian state media in terms of what they are reporting out from, the Russian government official sort of side of things too.
Okay. Where can people find your work if they want to take in what you wrote here on the Russian sanctions? They want to follow along with what you're going to be covering. Where do they go, Caroline?
You can find more of my work at thehill.com. Covering a span of topics, but Ukraine and Russia is being one of them. So,
have you been there? Have you been in the war zone yet, or are you covering this from DC?
I'm covering this from DC. Yeah.
Okay, do that. Continue that. I don't want to see you on the news. I mean, I'm nervous about this. Obviously, you're a very good reporter and somebody who will dive into meaty subjects like this. But Caroline, good to have you coming down the road with us. I appreciate it.